Chicago, 1950s, December. Imagine, you're a parent, it's cold, Christmas is just over.
Yeah.
And you let your teenage daughters go out to the movies.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty normal, right?
Yeah.
Except these girls, Barbara and Patricia Grimes, they vanished.
Just gone.
Gone. And it's not just some random event.
No.
The city's on edge already because just the year before, three boys disappeared too, and then they're found, murdered miles away.
It's a nightmare scenario. I mean, for parents, especially back then.
Absolutely. And that's what we're diving into today, right? The Grimes sisters.
Right into it.
This case, it's got everything. I mean,
Right.
twists, turns, dead ends.
It's a puzzle that's never really been solved.
Exactly. And we've got a lot to go on, right? We're talking original news reports, witness statements.
Oh, and we've got some powerful stuff from their mother, Loretta.
Really gives you a feel for what she went through.
Oh.
So let's start with the family. What was their life like, before all this happened?
Okay, so picture this. Working class Chicago, 7 kids in the family. Dad was a truck driver, Joseph. Mom, Loretta, she was a file clerk.
A busy household?
Oh, yeah. And they were divorced, actually.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, a few years before. But seems like it was amicable,
Okay.
Everyone says they got along, focused on the kids. And that's what's really striking about Loretta. I mean, she just loved those kids,
Doing her best in a tough situation?
Absolutely. Single mom, 7 kids, 1950s.
Not easy.
Yeah.
And the Grimes sisters themselves. We've got Barbara, she's 15, and Patricia, 13. What were they like?
So from what we gather, Barbara was the responsible one, held things together.
Older sister, right.
Exactly. She even had a job, part-time, helping out the family.
Wow, 15 and already working.
Trying to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And then you've got Patricia, the younger one.
Yeah.
She was the lively one, full of energy.
And they were both huge Elvis fans.
Oh, massive. I mean, this is 1956. Elvis is like the king, right?
It's Elvis mania.
Totally.
Yeah.
And for teenage girls, he was everything.
So they go see Love Me Tender a bunch of times.
Over and over again. They even joined his fan club, waiting for those membership cards.
It's that kind of teenage excitement that makes this whole thing, even more tragic.
Absolutely. They were just normal girls caught up in the Elvis craze.
And then, December 28th, a Friday night, they head out to see Love Me Tender again. I mean, Loretta probably didn't even think twice.
No, not at all. They promised to be home by 11:45, pretty normal curfew.
Seems reasonable.
But midnight hits, and nothing.
Oh, man.
Loretta must have been frantic.
I can only imagine.
She sends her other kids, Teresa and Joey, to the bus stop thinking maybe they missed their bus.
Hoping for the best.
But bus after bus comes, and they're not there.
That sinking feeling, waiting and waiting.
Just awful.
So they call the police, but it seems like things don't really get going until it hits the newspapers, and tragically, on Patricia's 14th birthday.
Awful timing. Just awful. And the city, well, they're already scared, with those missing boys the year before.
Still fresh in everyone's minds.
Definitely.
So you've got this city on edge, a mother just desperate to find her daughters, and the police are trying to figure out what happened. Any leads come up?
Well, there are tons of sightings, people saying they saw the girls all over. Diners, buses, even on trains.
Really?
Yeah, it seemed like everyone wanted to help, wanted to believe they were okay.
But looking back now, knowing what happened, those must have been false hope.
Oh, yeah. A lot of it was just, wishful thinking, people seeing what they wanted to see.
It's understandable, though, in that situation.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in such a high-profile case, emotions running high. And that's where things get tricky. Eyewitness testimony, it's not always reliable.
Right, right. So what about that theory about sailors? I mean, Patricia had this pen pal, a sailor who was supposed to be home for the holidays, and they'd even met some sailors at the theater a month before.
Yeah, that's right. It does seem a bit strange at first, considering their ages. But you have to remember, Chicago back then, it was a big Navy town. Sailors on leave were everywhere. And unfortunately, sometimes there were dangers that came with that.
I see. So the police looked into it.
Oh, yeah. They investigated, but they couldn't find any solid link between those sailors and the girls.
Okay. So weeks go by, the search continues, and it must have been just agonizing for Loretta and the family.
Just imagine the not knowing every day that passes.
Awful. And then that terrible discovery. January 22nd, 1957, a rural road outside the city.
Yeah. This couple, the Prescotts, they're driving along this deserted stretch of road, German Church Road.
Okay.
And they spot something in a ditch. At first, they think it's mannequins.
Mannequins?
Yeah, just lying there. But something bothers them, so they drive back later.
Oh, no.
And that's when they realize It's not mannequins. It's the bodies of Barbara and Patricia.
It's just chilling, that detail about the mannequins. It really gives you a sense of the state they were in.
They were, yeah. Nude, partially covered in snow, exposed to the elements. And the frustrating part, they were found so close to help. Just a mile from the Willow Springs Police Department. A mile.
So close, yet so far.
It's heartbreaking. Imagine if they had been found sooner.
It adds another layer of tragedy to the whole thing. So, the bodies are identified, the city is in mourning. What did the autopsy say? How did they die?
Well, this is where things get even more complicated. The official cause of death for both girls was shock and exposure.
Meaning?
Meaning they likely froze to death.
So they were dumped there, alive.
Probably, yeah. That night they disappeared, left out there in the freezing cold.
But there were signs of violence, right? I mean, some reports mentioned stab wounds, bruising.
Yeah, there were puncture wounds, possibly from an ice pick, and Barbara had bruising on her face. But here's the thing. The pathologists couldn't say for sure if those injuries happened before or after they died.
I see.
And this is where we have to talk about something really disturbing. A decision was made by the coroner's office that would really impact the entire investigation.
What do you mean?
They decided to hide evidence of sexual assault.
What? Why
Yeah.
would they do that?
The thinking back then, and it's appalling to us now, was that revealing that information would ruin the girls' reputations.
Wow.
Like it would somehow make them less deserving of sympathy.
So the focus was on protecting their reputations, not on finding the truth.
Unfortunately, yeah, that was the mindset back then, 1950s, huge emphasis on female purity, and it really warped things.
It's hard to believe that could happen. But it really underscores how societal norms can impact justice.
Definitely. And so the police are now dealing with a case that's both heartbreaking and incredibly confusing.
And everyone wants answers.
Of course, and that's when a suspect emerges, this young guy, 21 years old, Benny Bedwell.
So Benny Bedwell, he's young, kind of troubled, and now he's the prime suspect. Did the police have anything concrete on him?
Well, some things pointed to him, yeah. A cab driver said he saw Benny with the girls at a diner down on Skid Row.
Skip.
Yeah, not a great area. And the diner owners, they said the same thing. They remembered seeing him with the girls. And they said Barbara, she had a cold, seemed out of it, like maybe drugged, and she was trying to leave.
That's suspicious. So did Benny confess?
He did, actually. But his story, it was a mess all over the place. First, he says he saw his friends kill the girls.
Wow.
Then he changes it, says they ditched him at the movies, and later he confesses to being with them for days, driving around, drinking, and then he says he knocked them unconscious before dumping them on German Church Road.
So many different stories. What did the police make of all that?
Well, some of them, especially Sheriff Lyman, they were convinced he did it.
They thought his confession matched up with some of the witness statements.
Yeah, exactly. But others, they weren't so sure. They pointed out all these holes in his story.
Like what? What didn't add up?
For one thing, Benny said the girls had hot dogs at a gas station, but the autopsy showed they hadn't eaten hot dogs. And he described this really violent beating, but the girls' injuries didn't quite match up. And here's the big one. His confession had all these graphic sexual details.
Right.
But remember, the official autopsy said there was no sexual assault.
Ah, because the coroner hid that evidence. So even if Benny was telling the truth about some things, his whole story seemed made up.
Exactly. The missing information just made everything unreliable.
It's a real mess. So what about Loretta Grimes, the girl's mother? What did she think about all this?
Loretta, she was adamant. Benny was lying. She was so protective of her daughters, even after they were gone.
I can't imagine what she was going through.
She just knew they wouldn't have been in those places, doing those things. She even argued with a witness at the coroner's inquest over something like 30 cents.
Really?
Yeah, she was just fighting for them, trying to protect their memory.
It's powerful, that kind of love, even in the face of such tragedy. So what happened to Benny? Did they convict him?
No. With all the inconsistencies and Loretta pushing back hard, his lawyer argued that his confession was forced.
Coerced.
Yeah. So Benny was released on bail, and the case went cold for decades.
Wow. But people didn't forget.
Right. No, not at all. And years later, this retired police officer, Ray Johnson, he decided to take another look, see if there was anything missed.
A cold case reinvestigation. That's always interesting.
Yeah, and one of the first things he finds is this report from Loretta. She had told the police about these disturbing phone calls she got during the investigation.
Like prank calls.
No, much worse than that. One caller, he told her he was the one who undressed the girls. And a year later, another call saying, I got away with another one.
Oh my God. Like he was bragging.
Chilling, right.
Yeah.
And guess what? The very next day after that call, another young girl, Bonnie Lee Scott, she's 15, she's murdered.
No.
And her body is found just 3 miles from where they found Barbara and Patricia.
3 miles. That can't be a coincidence.
It's too close. And a guy named Charles Melquest, he's eventually convicted of Bonnie Lee's murder.
Okay.
But he only serves 8 years. People believe he had connections to the mob, the Chicago outfit.
And they helped him get a lighter sentence. So now we have this convicted murderer, possible mob ties, operating in the same area as the Grimes sisters. Did Johnson think there was a connection?
Oh, absolutely. And he digs deeper, finds out that Melquest actually knew Sheldon Teller, one of the lead investigators on the Grimes case.
No way.
Yeah. And guess what? Teller, he had mob ties too. So Johnson starts to think maybe Melquest was protected during the Grimes investigation, maybe with Teller's help.
That's terrifying, like a cover-up.
It's a very disturbing possibility that these powerful forces were manipulating things.
But if Melquist was a suspect back then, why didn't they go after him harder?
Well, remember, they were so focused on Benny, and they didn't have all the information, the coroner withholding evidence.
Right.
And that missing information, the sexual assault, that might have been the key to linking Melquest to the Grimes case.
It's tragic, really. Trying to protect their reputations might have actually prevented justice from being served. So what about Melquest? Was he ever officially linked to the Grimes sisters?
Sadly, no. He died in 2010, the same year Johnson started looking into the case, so we may never know for sure.
Wow.
But the similarities between the cases, how close they were, his crimes, the mob connections, it all points to a very disturbing possibility.
It's like the truth was right there, but they couldn't see it.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
Incredibly. So the Grimes sisters case, it's still officially unsolved, but Charles Melquest's shadow hangs over it. What do you think? What's the most suspicious element in all of this?
For me, it's those phone calls to Loretta. The fact that the caller knew things that weren't public, it's just creepy. It feels like whoever it was, they were really close to the crime.
Yeah.
And then Bonnie Lee's murder, the day after that call, it all feels connected somehow.
This has been a heavy one. Sadness, anger, so many unanswered questions.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely. And it makes you wonder, what if the key to this whole mystery lies in what was hidden, what they tried to keep secret?
Maybe there's something out there, some piece of evidence, a witness, something that could finally bring closure.
It's a thought that's both hopeful and haunting.
Well, we've gone through a lot today. A grieving mother, a botched investigation, a possible serial killer, maybe even a cover-up. It's a story that stays with you.
It really does.
And it makes you think about the choices that were made, the impact they had, the coroner withholding evidence, trying to protect those girls' reputations. Did it really help? Or did it just make things worse?
Tough question.
It's something to consider. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another look into the past.